members for the Native American Guardians Association and a member of the Chiricahua Apache tribe. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Mark, there's so much controversy over this, and I got to ask you, as a member of the Native American community, are you offended? Have you been offended by the name Redskins?
Absolutely not. I've been a lifelong Redskin fan. I was born in D.C. I grew up in the '80s in the heyday of all of our Super Bowl championships. There's a sense in Washington D.C. that the Redskin could do no wrong, and there was never a time in my life where the word Redskin was ever used in any type of derogatory way.
Mark, the interesting thing is, I get your personal stance, but as you talk to other members of the Native American community, are you in the majority or the minority? Because it's interesting. I hear about, the Redskins have been saying for years that they did a study and that something like 9 of 10 people in the community agreed with them. But then I hear the mainstream media talk about how Native Americans are all offended about it, but no one ever actually quotes them. And so my question is, despite your personal views, are you in the majority or the minority, do you think, of the Native American community?
Well, I'm very positive that I'm in the majority because one of the things that I did when I first, because being a native American and a native of Washington D.C., I recognized that I could just be biased because it's home team. It's also something that as a Native American that I was drawn to because it was a representation of my my culture. Or within pop culture was a representation of Native Americans. So I sought out the opposition. I sought out the people who claimed to be offended because I wanted to truly understand where they were coming from, and if I were in some way wrong, in terms of why I was not offended, I could understand why they were offended, and perhaps come to some kind of agreement or something, some kind of compromise. But in my search for finding that truth, I found that I was not alone. I found many Native Americans all across the country, from California to to Florida to New Mexico, Arizona, all the way up to the Dakotas, that were in agreement with me. I was quite pleasantly surprised because, like I said, I was willing to admit or willing to accept that I might be biased because because of where I'm from. But we were all drawn to the team for the similar reasons, because of its Native American history, and not just because of a logo or picture. It's because that logo was given by the Native American community to this team. The Washington Redskins had Native Americans on the team, and I was familiar with that as a kid growing up. And being a Native American, you don't have very many, sort of heroes and things like that. So Jim Thorpe was one of a Native American sort of sports hero that I was, quite associated with growing up, and understanding the Redskin football originated from Indian football. If people understand what that means, the Carlisle Indian football, where Jim Thorpe played on that team, and so some of the players, when they finally integrated into the professional football league, they obviously they were just white players at first, but they integrated the Native Americans on that team with the coach Lone Star Dietz at the time, who was very familiar with Indian football. So this is a source of that pride that we have in the team itself.
Right. Mark, listen, I think it's so fascinating because you just brought so much information to this debate that's missing when the media talks about it, in terms of the history with the Native American community, the logo being made by somebody from that community. And I wish that more people understood so much of what you just brought to this debate before they rushed it. Thank you for being here.
You just watched